Well, hi everybody. So I'm here today with Flying Iron Simulations 109. Now this is a fairly detailed plane, and arguably maybe one of the more difficult planes to take off in Microsoft Flight Simulator right now. So we're going to have a look at it. It's probably going to take a little bit of time to go through some things, but either way, we'll have a look at the cockpit. We'll go through some of the features, get it started, go take it off, go fly it around and land it, albeit badly, and then do a review on it. Now hopefully if you're having trouble taking this thing off, some of the pointers I give here later on will help you out at least a little bit. At least that's what I'm hoping for. So let's go ahead and get started so this doesn't end up being too long. Alrighty, well here we are on the 109. It looks really nice in this thing. I have no complaints on modeling and texture quality. Both are fantastic. This actually may be, at least in my opinion, one of Flying Iron's best looking planes so far. Not that any of the other ones were poor looking or anything like that, but this one is kind of on another level. It is really nice in here. There's a fair amount of detail and everything like that kind of dispersed around the cockpit, but for the most part, this is all we're really going to look at. We're going to go ahead and move on to the features. Alrighty, well we're going to go through a few things here in the cockpit. We're going to start out with the tablet, so we need to kind of click on this bolt right here, and that'll bring the tablet up. Now I'm not going to go through everything. There's a lot of neat information contained in this thing, but we're pretty much just going to start on loadout. So this is where we're going to add the drop tanks. Go ahead and click on medium range, we'll get the center drop tank. If we click on long range, we'll get a tank out on each wing. We're also going to get this little box down here. These two switches are going to be your fuel valves. You will have to turn these on so you can actually draw fuel from the wing tanks. When you want to drop your tanks, come down here to this little red pole that's labeled emergency tank drop. Just pull on this thing, it'll drop both the center and the wing tanks. Now as far as the wing tank goes, you don't have to worry about a fuel valve with this one. It pretty much draws fuel out of it automatically. Go over here to the autopilot. The only reason I'm really going to bring up the autopilot is because it's a little bit different on the 109. So the new addition to it that is quite nice is that we can now adjust our heading with the heading compass up here by just kind of rotating the dial around. So it'll change the desired heading here in the autopilot. We won't have to keep bringing up the tablet to do that, which is kind of nice. We'll come over here to the workshop page. Now this is everything on the plane that can fail. As far as kind of how this thing works, anything that is failed, you're going to need to have the engine off, and you're going to need to click on it to repair it. As far as the other things, this thing does save its state between flights, so you will have to, it will be in the same condition that it was in the last time that you left it. Now there are a few exceptions to fixing this thing, or I guess the best way to put it is there is a shortcut to it. So if we come over here to settings and we unclick stresses and failures, we're basically turning damage off. We turn it back on. What it's going to do is it's basically going to reset a few things in here. That's going to be primarily like a failed engine, or it's going to be, damaged landing gear or something like that. Now the gear can collapse, and they can fail for a number of other reasons. It's pretty neat, quite like it. But either way, that's kind of a shortcut to kind of reset those systems. Now that's not going to fix anything in here that is wearable. So anything that gets damaged through wear, it's still going to maintain sort of your wear level. Like you can see that the battery hasn't been fixed by doing that. But if the engine were damaged and the gear were damaged, it would. Move over here to settings. Now we're going to talk about the gun sight. The gun sight pretty much does work. It actually has a sight on it. Let's say that's about the best way to put it. The sunshade also you can use if you want. When you get rid of this thing, you're going to get the GPS. It's going to pop up here. So we're going to move down here. I'm going to skip a few things, but we're going to move down to tropical filter. When we do this, we're going to get this little pole over here. I'm not really going to go through this too much other than to say basically this thing just prevents like sand and dirt and things like that from getting sucked into the intake. I don't think that it has really any effect on the plane itself in terms of preventing that. I don't think this is something that causes damage. I haven't run into anything while using it that would make me think that it does, but given kind of how this plane is, it wouldn't surprise me if it actually functions. And we also get this lovely little umbrella here to keep us nice and cool and out of the sun. Now, the umbrella will not show up unless it's above 85 degrees outside. Simplified ground handling. If you don't have rudder pedals, I would go ahead and check this. What it's going to do is it's going to tie the brakes and the rudder movements together. It makes it a little bit easier to taxi this thing. Ground handling is a little bit nicer. If you have rudder pedals, I'd leave this unchecked. It works out just fine. Install weapons. Pretty self-explanatory. Same thing with radio and transponder. Now, the only reason I'm bringing up radio and transponder is because if you're like me and you don't really think about altitude in meters, it doesn't translate very well in your brain, This does have an altimeter in it that reads out in feet. Otherwise, just kind of remember that 1 meter is roughly 3 feet 2 inches. Now, as far as replace German with English, that one's pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to change the labeling inside the cockpit so that it's either in German or in English so you can read it. As far as realism settings go, went through this a little bit, but this is basically how you turn damage on and off. This black bar here is going to be basically a readout of what's currently being damaged on your plane. If there's nothing here, you're fine. There's going to be a little code that gives you a percentage. That's basically what's going to be getting what's being damaged and how much damage it's accumulated so far. As far as the battery connection goes, this is pretty much just if this is checked, you don't have to turn the battery on to start the plane. If it's unchecked, you will. Aileron trim is, I guess the best way to describe it, it's kind of an assist. This thing rolls to the left pretty bad, so this kind of just minimizes that roll. It's still there, but it does minimize it a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of the tablet. Go over a couple of things here in the cockpit. We've got gear emergency, or at least what it's labeled here. If your gear fail, just pull on this, and it will force them down. This lever over here, labeled canopy jettison. This is how you're going to jettison the canopy if you want to. Now, if you want to continue flying after you've done that, you're going to need to go into the settings menu. And so, what is it? Assistance options, and you're going to need to disable airframe stress damage, I think is what it's called. And then you can keep flying with the canopy off if you want, for whatever reason. This little silver pole here that has a name in German that I can't pronounce is how you're going to clear out your spark plug fouling. So we'll just pull on this, and I'll go ahead and do that. There's a shortcut for it, which is going to be toggle taxi lights. Don't really let this thing get too close to about 60%. It might cause the engine to die. Over here on the right side of the instrument panel, we've got this gauge right here. This is pretty much VOR, so just, enter a nav frequency into the GPS and this thing will function. Now this gauge right here is something I like to call the prop clock. The best way I can describe this is that it's kind of a readout for your propeller's current pitch. So if it's at 1230, it's going to be at full fine, and if it's 430, it's going to be at full course, and then depending upon where it is in there is going to be basically the readout for it. So right now it's at noon, which I believe is 25 degrees. And then we have this switch right here. This is going to be war emergency power. So you flip this thing on, you'll get a pretty nice increase in power. It'll bring the manifold pressure up to about 1.7. Amazingly enough, it's going to last for about 27 minutes. Now you can't really use it for 27 minutes constantly. You can really only use it for about 10 minutes continuously, or it's going to cause engine damage, at least according to the manual. So after you hit the 10-minute mark, you need to turn it off, reduce the manifold pressure down to about 1.3, leave it there for about 5 minutes, then you can go ahead and start using it again in like 10-minute increments until you end up running out. The last thing we're going to talk about here is going to be prop control. So this is below our throttle. There's a little click point. This is how you can switch out of automatic propeller pitch mode, whatever we want to call that, prop control, to manual, so that you can actually control your propeller's pitch manually. Anyway, there's not really a reason to use that unless you just want to. There may be some instances where manual propeller pitch is superior to automatic, but for the most part in the simulator, it's not necessary, and it works just fine in automatic mode anyway. Now there are a few other things around the cockpit that I've not gone over, and I'm not going to go over them. Do have a look around here. There's a lot of neat little details and things like that kind of dispersed around this thing. So do have a look. It's a real nice one. But either way, we're going to go ahead and get this thing going. Alrighty, well, we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. Now, before you start it up, I would either hold your brakes down or put the chocks in, which is going to be parking brake. This thing does have a tendency to want to roll forward when you first start it up. Now, for those of you that want to just quick start this thing, you can press Control E, and we'll go ahead and quick start it for everybody that wants to start it up cold and dark. We're going to start out over here on the right side of the cockpit with the battery. We're going to flip this on. We're going to press Control 6. That will bring us to the breaker panel view here. Now the fastest way to do this is to just close A1 all circuit breakers here. It will close all of these circuits at once, but in the interest of showing you what is necessary, we're going to go ahead and close them individually. So we'll start out here with A8 generator. We'll go ahead and close that. A12 propeller pitch, A21 starter ignition, A22 starter inertia system, A27 fuel pump. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and open up the radiator shutters here. You could probably do that later, but I'm going to do it now. We'll go over here to the left side of the cockpit. Now it's a little obscured by the throttle, but the fuel valve is right here. We're going to go ahead and move this all the way up to the front. Now that is as far forward as it goes, not the front tank, which it should be labeled P1 and P2 for both, and that's what we're looking for. We're going to come down here to the primer. Just going to click on this probably 4 or 5 times. I will say ready. Might be a good idea to give it like one more click after that. We'll come up here and we'll uncover the starter, move the magnetos up to M1 and 2, and then we'll come to the inertia starter here, which is this red button. We're going to click on this and we're going to hold it down until we get to about 16,000 or so. It will say whatever RPM and ready once it's ready. And then once we do that, we move down to the starter. It might be a good idea to give yourself a little bit of a window before you actually move to the starter. So probably take it up to something like 17,000. As we can see, it now says ready. So we'll just come down here and pull the starter. The ground crew is going to go ahead and move the umbrella for us. Close this again here. The last thing we have left to do is close the rest of these circuits. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to click on A1 and we'll go ahead and close them all at once. Now, that is pretty much it. The 109 is started. So we're going to go ahead and head out to the runway because this thing heats up kind of quick. If we don't, the engine takes over. It's 105 degrees out here. Alrighty. Well, made it out here to the end of the runway, which in and of itself is a little bit impressive in this plane. And not the most well-behaved thing on the ground. It likes to be in the air, it just doesn't really like to get there. So I'm going to go through a little bit of taxiing information here before we take off, and then sort of a brief walkthrough of kind of how to take this thing off, or at least try to give you some pointers on taking it off so you can take it off kind of smoothly. Now, as far as taxiing it goes, it does not like to turn very well. So probably it gets nice once you get up to about 12 knots. So you're going to probably need to bring the RPM up to about, I don't know, 1,000, maybe 1,100. And once you get up to about 12 knots or so, 10 or 12, it gets real well behaved. Really do like FlyingIron's sort of tail dragger physics, or whatever they call it, or like how all these planes steer on the ground. Now, as far as, let's say, turning it around, for whatever reason this thing turns really nicely to the left. It does not turn very well to the right. So if you have to turn the plane around, just go to the left. It does that like almost naturally. It's the right's going to give you a little bit of trouble unless you just can't turn it around to the right or the left, and then you're going to have some problems. But as far as what we're going to do here when we take off, this thing again is very unruly until we get to about 100 kilometers an hour, which is roughly about where the tail wheel seems to lift off. And so what we're going to need to do is we're going to be real nice and smooth with all the applications of anything that we do in this plane. Jerky movement is okay, but it's better to be smooth. So we're going to want to go ahead and throttle up and bring the manifold pressure up to about 1.1, and we're going to want to go ahead and move our rudder and the stick all the way over to the right. Now we're going to do this pretty much from the time that we roll, not necessarily because it's absolutely necessary for the initial roll, but you are going to need it, so you might as well just be prepared for it and already have it here. So as we start to get to about 90 kilometers per hour, let's say, the tail wheel is going to start to lift off. Now when you notice the tail wheel start to lift off, then you can sort of start to gradually unwind all of these things, and we can go ahead and begin to throttle up to about 1.3. Now as this plane starts to pick up speed, it does become much more well behaved, which is why we're going to start to unwind these things even more as we get closer and closer to about 180 kilometers per hour, and then we can pretty much just lift the plane off the ground. But I would not bring your stick back to center, and I wouldn't necessarily bring the rudder completely back to center. Now you can you're going to want to start to sort of unwind the rudder a little bit sooner than you start to unwind the ailerons, but you're probably going to want to, at the end of all of this, probably still have a little bit more on your rudder than your aileron. So, hope that made sense. We're going to go ahead and take off here. I am going to still go ahead and like talk my way through the takeoff, but that just helps out so I don't, in case I forget something. So the last couple of things here before we take off, anytime that you are taking off in this thing or landing it, you really want to have the tail wheel locked. You know, again, it can ground loop and all the rest of that stuff, and this just makes it a little bit nicer. Now it says tight here, but that's basically what it is. So if you use whatever your tail wheel lock shortcut is, it'll go ahead and put it from loose to tight, because that's how it's phrased here in the cockpit. Now, as far as flaps go, you can go ahead and put them down to about 20 degrees. I'm still out on whether or not I like the flaps at 20 degrees or up, but either way, it takes off just fine without either one of them. Now, we're going to want to make sure that we're in auto for takeoff. You can go ahead and put it into manual. If you're going to put it into manual, you probably want to start out at noon up here. Same thing kind of goes for taxiing. If you're in manual, you want to have the prop clock up here at about noon. And let's see what else here. As far as trimming the nose down, really wouldn't worry too much about that one or anything like that. Like, you can, it's recommended in the manual. I leave this thing at basically 0 on trim. So, let's see here. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move this down to 0, the aileron trim, just to remove the assist so you can see how bad this thing rolls to the left, because it is quite bad. I've also gone ahead and removed the gun sight, so it makes it a little bit easier to see the manifold pressure gauge here. And we're going to go ahead and get rolling. So again, we're going to go ahead and just move the stick all the way over to the right, go all the way over to the right on the rudder, start throttling up here. Want to be nice and smooth with it. Want to bring it up to about 1.1. We want to leave it there until the tail wheel comes off the ground. As this thing again starts to build up speed, we're going to want to kind of unwind these things just a little bit. We've got the tail wheel off the ground, so we're going to go up to 1.3. We're going to hit a couple bears. We're going to begin to pull back here on the stick. And we're just going to lift off. Go ahead and put the gear up. Go ahead and track the flaps. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave the radiator shutters open because even though it is about 8:15 in the morning here, it's still like 95 degrees. So welcome to Texas, everybody. But you can go ahead and close the radiator shutter, or put them to automatic if you want. They do create a little bit of drag. Now, as far as some engine management information here, as far as everything goes here, if you want to fly this plane around without damaging it at all, you want to leave your manifold pressure at about 1.3, and you shouldn't incur any damage. That'll be about 1.3 in the manifold pressure, about 2,600 RPM. This should get you about 490 or so, maybe closer to 500. Now, if the shutters are open, it's going to cause a little bit of drag, and if you put the tropical air filter on here, that's also going to cause a little bit of drag. That's going to slow you down about 12 kilometers per hour. Now, it is completely possible to go ahead and basically just full throttle this thing, so you can bring it all the way up to about 1.4 on the manifold pressure, and that should be somewhere around about 2,800 RPM. That will cause a little bit of damage to the plane, but at least in what I've noticed about it is that you're probably going to run out of fuel before you really incur any permanent damage at that setting, so it's not something to really worry about. Now, as far as cooling and everything else like that goes, and the temperatures, for oil, we want it to be not above about 85 degrees. Again, it takes a while for it to cause any kind of damage that way, so you could probably get away with letting it go above 85 for a while. In terms of cooling, we don't want to go above about 105. Now, I went ahead and closed the shutters one time and just flew it around just to see how long it would take to incur permanent damage. It seemed to be something about 8 minutes or so, somewhere in that range. So keep an eye on that one. This plane also does have a bit of a tendency to kind of heat up until you get above about 400 kilometers an hour. So if you bring up the tablet here and we go into settings and we look at this, right now we have, well, it's going down right now because we've started to increase our speed, but it tends to creep up on you. Not something to worry about too much. So if for whatever reason, if it's not decreasing, if the damage isn't going away, then just go ahead and open up the shutters and it should clear everything out. Now, as far as how this thing flies, I'm going to go ahead now and just take my hands off the stick so you can see how bad this thing rolls. This is basically how it naturally behaves when you have your hands on anything. It's still a very nice plane to fly. If I were to compare it to the Spitfire, it's a little bit heavier in sort of the way it feels. It kind of feels like flying a Mack truck, maybe, in a way. It's not unmaneuverable or anything like that, but it still has a nice roll rate, has a nice rate of climb and all the rest of those things. the sort of like responsiveness to the pitch is good. It just seems as though it's heavy. I don't really know how to explain it other than that, other than to say it's heavy. Now, the sweet spot, at least for what I've noticed with this thing, seems to be somewhere between about 400 kilometers per hour and about 500. That's where it seems to be very maneuverable. If it gets too much slower than that, you're going to lose some maneuverability and the rest of that stuff. This thing does bleed speed pretty bad. So if you put it into a tight turn or anything like that, it's going to bleed speed really quickly. If you get this thing into a dive and you get going too fast, you're going to need a pretty good amount of altitude to pull it out of that dive. It does not like to pull up. And again, the faster you go, the more that kind of seems to happen. It's a very interesting plane to kind of fly, though, I will admit that. Just in kind of its behaviors, really do rather like it. So, it's a fun one. Flight model's pretty good and all the rest of that stuff. There are probably a number of things that I'm going to kind of leave out here in this section and try and be a little bit more detailed when we get to the actual review. But in terms of damages and flying and all the rest of that stuff, that's pretty much what you got to worry about. Real nice to fly low level. It is pretty stable, you know, aside from how bad it likes to roll. But once you kind of figure out, you know, how it rolls, it's real nice to fly. It's really stable. It's fairly controlled. It has some interesting quirks to it and things like that. But overall, it's a real nice plane. Now, as far as stall speed goes, with the flaps up, I think it's about 180 kilometers per hour. And with them down, I think it's down to about 160 kilometers per hour. Other than that, don't go over about 750 on it. And again, just be aware if you start into a really high-speed dive, you're going to need a pretty decent altitude to kind of pull out of that. So other than that, I think I'm going to go ahead and bring it in here for a landing. So I'll see y'all back here in a second when I get all lined up for everything. Now, be aware, I do not land this plane very well, so I'm gonna try and give you some pointers, but I might be off on some of them, and it might not go so well, but I'm at least gonna make an attempt to. Alrighty. Now, once we've gotten below about 300 kilometers per hour, we can go ahead and put the gear down. Do remember that sometimes your gear don't come down. You can damage them and they will collapse. So for whatever reason they do, go ahead and pull that red handle there. Luckily, they seem to come down. Now, once we're below about 250, we can go ahead and put the flaps all the way down. I'd probably put the flaps down to about 20 degrees as you're starting to slow down here anyway. Now, we need to come in here at about 200 to 220 kilometers an hour. Now, I'm going a little bit fast here, so we're going to go ahead and back the throttle back down. Just help myself slow down. Now, if you hear that knocking, don't worry about that. That's just your slats. We're going about 200 kilometers per hour. I should really be doing about 180 here for my runway. Now, it's not the easiest thing to see out of, so we're going to kind of a weird landing here. Go ahead and just get the throttle all the way down here and just kind of let it set itself down. It should set down somewhere around about 150, and it shouldn't bounce. If it does, maybe just one. If you come down too fast, it's going to really want to bounce on you. Now, it doesn't have the best brakes, but it doesn't have the worst brakes, and we just stopped before the end of the runway. So, that is pretty much it here for the 109. The one thing that I did forget to mention is that you are going to want to pay attention to this thing every once in a while here. I did forget to mention that. I can't remember what that thing is called. Well, I can remember what the thing is called, but I can't pronounce it, so it doesn't matter. But either way, if you sit on the ground too long, you're going to need to watch this, and really might need to pay attention to it a little bit on descents. That was close. Alrighty. So that is pretty much it here for the 109. Probably not the best explanation of how to land this thing, but everything in this plane seems to kind of happen kind of quickly. So it's a fun one though. I can't believe I'm actually going to say this, but I like the 109. So I will be back here in a second, guys, for the review, and that'll pretty much be it for today. Alrighty, well, if you would like to pick up Flying Iron's 109, it's about $30. It is available from FlyingIronSimulations.com. Do be aware, if you buy this one through the Microsoft Flight Simulator Marketplace, you will not get the guns. Now, Flying Iron already has 3 pretty high-quality warbirds that are reasonably priced, and I think this one just kind of bumps it up to another level. Overall, the 109 is a great one. The short version is it looks good, it sounds good, and it flies good. As far as the model and textures, there are a lot of little details I'm not going to get into. I might touch on a few things that stood out to me, but I'll start with the general stuff. The exterior model is fantastic, as well as the textures. Both are very high quality. No gaps in the model or anything like that. Everything fits together real nice. I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about the cockpit because it looks really good. It's probably the best looking cockpit I've seen FlyingIron make. Normally they make really good looking stuff to begin with, and this one is somehow an improvement over that. I have no idea what they did this time, but they did something. In terms of the interiors, model, and texturing, again, very high quality. The animations are really quite nice on this one. I'm probably going to end up focusing mainly on the interior, but the animations on the exterior are good as well. As far as the interior goes, there's some things in the cockpit that shake when the engine is on. The friction lock does work. Not sure if it's necessary, though. Either way, again, real nice touches. The UV lighting looks good as well. The last thing I'm going to talk about before I move on to the sounds is the liveries. There are 10 of them, with a fair amount of wear and tear on each of them. They look like they've been used, and overall, it's a fantastic looking plane. Well, to start with, it's very loud, which is always nice on warbirds. All the sound effects in terms of sound quality are crisp and clear. The engine sounds good. It might not sound exactly like the real thing, but it's pretty close. Now, I've never heard a 109 in person, so exposure to this thing has pretty much just been videos and things like that. But it does sound good, and there are a few subtle engine noises as well. One thing that stood out to me was the engine running rough. The switches and everything else sound good as well, and a bit unique. I did want to touch on the flyby sound effect. It sounds great as it flies away from you. And I'll be a little bit nitpicky on this, and to be fair, it might be my audio settings, but I didn't notice the supercharger that much as it approached the camera. Again, I've never heard one in person, but when it flies towards you, that supercharger sound is rather prominent. However, I don't really think this should inhibit your purchase, and if it does, you're missing out on something really cool here. Either way, it sounds great. The flyby sound effects are such an improvement over default Microsoft Flight Simulator flyby sounds, and just overall the thing sounds great. As far as the flight characteristics, I like it. I've been having a lot of fun with it. I like how it feels, which is always kind of a strange thing to say about a game. I'm not very familiar with the 109. I've flown it in a couple other sims, but that's about it. So I've never flown one in real life, and I honestly don't think that's surprising to anybody. But because of that, I have no idea how realistic it is. However, I'm just going to read from their website, and this is what FlyingIron had to say. We have been collaborating for almost a year with 109 pilots, DB605A experts, and technicians to develop a truly realistic flight model of the airframe and engine flight dynamics. The flight and engine models have been exhaustively tested by a team of experts to validate flight performance and behaviors. The flight model includes multiple custom-coded additions to extend realism beyond what's possible in the base simulator. So I'm just going to go with that. Beyond that, it's a bit of a handful on the ground. Now that's not a complaint. Once it gets in the air, it's real nice. It's not the nimblest plane. Now that's not to say that it's not maneuverable, it just kind of has a heavy feel to it, and it bleeds speed quickly. If you don't turn a very tight circle, it'll maintain a pretty high speed in the turn. Same thing kind of holds true for all of its maneuvers. But if you do pull things too tight in this one, you're going to bleed speed pretty quickly, and you're going to probably have a bad time. I could go on about this plane, but I'll leave it here. Once you start getting things down, it's a very enjoyable plane to fly in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So we'll move on to the failure and overall damage system. They've expanded their failure system from previous planes, so it'll overheat, the engine can fail, those kinds of things. They've added some electrical failures, spark plug fouling, the landing gear can collapse, and fail for a couple of other reasons. Now remember, you can always turn damage off if you don't want to deal with it. There may be more things that can fail on the 109, it continues to surprise me. Now as far as what I've encountered while flying the 109, the battery has died, I let the spark plugs get above 60% and the engine died. I purposefully overheated the engine, the oil gasket blew on a separate flight, it's at the end of the video. But apparently this happened because I did not let the engine warm up enough. My landing gear have collapsed repeatedly. I've done a one-wheeled landing, I've done a no-wheeled landing. My instruments failed, turned out to be a circuit, and the fuel pump stopped working. Again, it turned out to be a circuit. I didn't actually notice that one until I landed. The features on the 109 are good. If I include the damage system, it's great. I like the umbrella. There are some little details I like. I thought the ammo counter and actually having a sight was definitely an improvement. But overall, the features are good, and I'm pretty much just going to leave it there. So to kind of sign off here, I really do like this thing, and I can't believe that I have to say that about the measure shit, but I do. I really started to like it once I kind of switched my brain out of Spitfire mode and kind of learned how it wanted to be flown rather than the way I wanted to fly it. It's a good one. It's about $30. It's nicely detailed. It's a lot of fun to fly once you get it off the ground. Either way, looking forward to seeing what comes next from FlyingIron, which I think is the 190, but I'm not sure. One of these days, though, I do hope they bring their P-47 to Microsoft Flight Simulator. And that's pretty much all I've got for today, guys. The rest of this video is what the canopy looks like when it's covered in oil, landing on that failing engine, which I didn't think I did a half bad job of, and a random encounter with an F-16 that looks like an Airbus. And that'll kind of all pop up here after I get myself out of this interesting stall that I got myself into. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time. I don't think I did anything wrong.
messing up my review here, man. Alright, well, he's going to outrun me.